I will. Okay. I think this is the first class I've given to people in front of me. Huh? Oh, yes, it wasn't a class though. I remember the last time I did it. Might have been a year and a half ago. Yeah. Anyways, okay. I'm going to read a verse first, and from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And could I have some water? To my back. Thank you. Oh no. Can you put it in a stainless steel cup? So I'll read it first, as I said first, from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Loka Bida Bhai Prabhu Dashashmai De Jnana Rupa Gosa Nirasika Karana Shakti Sanchariya. Translation. Due to the crowds in Prayag, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to a place called the Sashvamedha Ghat. It was there that the Lord instructed Sri Rupa Goswami and empowered him in the philosophy of devotional service. Purport. Parasya Shaktir Vividhaya Shuryate. The Supreme Lord has multi-potencies, which the Lord bestows on His fortunate devotees. The Lord has a special potency by which He spreads the Krishna consciousness movement. This is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Lila 7:11, Kali Kaliyaradama Krishna Nam Sankirtan, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahe Tara Pavartana. One cannot spread the holy name of Krishna without being specifically empowered by Lord Krishna. Devotee who receives this power from the Lord must be considered very fortunate. The Krishna consciousness movement is spreading to enlighten people about their real position, their original relationship with Krishna. One requires Krishna's special power in order to be able to do this. People forget their relationship with Krishna and work under the spell of Maya, life after life, transmigrating from one body to another. This is the process of material existence. Supreme Lord Shri Krishna personally descends to teach people that their position in the material world is a mistaken one. The Lord again comes as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to induce people to take to Krishna consciousness. The Lord also empowers a special devotee to teach people their constitutional position. Om Agyana Timberandasya Garanjana Salakaya Chakshur Onminitam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Mangaya Te Ganim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurandina Taranam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Niravishesha Shanyavari Paschachadesha Tarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shri Gaura Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Today is a very special day, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. On this day, disciples and grand disciples and devotees who have all somehow come in contact with that Krishna Shakti which is described here, emanating from Srila Prabhupada's lotus mouth and manifest in unlimited varieties of ways throughout the whole world. They commemorate this day of his appearance as Vyasa Puja. And we read this verse. It's in reference to Srila Rupa Goswami, how Lord Chaitanya empowered Srila Rupa Goswami and gave him full potency to induce others to become Krishna conscious, and what to speak of, to reveal the most confidential truths of the Supreme Lord himself, which were fully manifest from the Lord into the heart of Srila Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada even speaks in relationship to his own spiritual master. In his concluding words to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, how he feels always the presence of his spiritual master within his heart, and how he feels constantly guided by him within his heart, and empowered by him. This we see is the ideal example of a pure Vaishnava who's been invested with this potency described from this verse that's quoted in the commentary, Krishna Shakti Vininahi Tare Pravartana. That verse Prabhupada would quote so many times. And of course he embodied such a perfect example of being empowered by the Lord. And the verse has been translated that unless one is invested with this potency, one cannot possibly spread the holy names of the Lord, as evidenced by Srila Prabhupada during his manifest presence in such a short period of time. how he was a true ambassador of Lord Chaitanya. Not only Lord Chaitanya's compassion, manifesting the potency of Lord Chaitanya's compassion, but in the Nectar of Devotion it's described Krishna's compassionate nature also. It's one of his qualities, it's one of his potencies. And he invests his compassionate nature, just as he invests different potencies in living entities and empowers them by giving them his various potencies. They are described in Chaitanya Charitamrita as Sakya-Vesha avatars. Now when we hear Sakya-Vesha avatar, the tendency is to merely say, or to think, are we ascribing a particular characteristic or to Srila Prabhupada, which is beyond that which he actually is? And I would like to take advantage of today's class to make it clear that we are not. We are not ascribing a characteristic or a potency coming from the Lord, an empowered devotee by the Lord. And the utilization of this term can never be inaccurate in our application of its use to Srila Prabhupada. And of course, we should be very careful because when we hear or describe today how there are different manifestations of Sakya-Vesha avatars, there are those who are described by Lord Chaitanya to Sanatana Goswami as empowered incarnations of the Lord. And he describes to Sanatana Goswami and Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are different examples of Sakya-Vesha avatars directly empowered, such as Shesha. He's directly empowered Sakya-Vesha avatar of the Lord. And different examples are given, such as Narada Muni as a Sakya-Vesha avatar of the Lord. But he has been invested with a particular potency of the Lord, the potency of devotion. For Kumaras, the Sakya-Vesha avatars of the Lord, they have been invested with a certain potency of knowledge. It doesn't mean they're the Supreme Lord, and we should never think that way. But they've been invested with potencies by the Lord to a partial degree to fulfill a particular purpose of the Lord. And in this the Lord invests his potencies in unlimited ways, in unlimited living entities. When Lord Chaitanya was describing the various Sakya-Vesha avatars of the Lord, he said, they are unlimited. I'm going to mention a few to you now, such as Narada, such as Shesha, such as Parashuram, such as Pitu Maharaj, such as Vyasadev. He mentions some of them. He said, but I'm only going to mention the chief ones from among them, because they are unlimited. And he describes there are two types. There are those who are incarnations of the Lord, and he says there are those who are called vibhuti. Vibhuti, as we know, Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita how he spread throughout creation through his different potencies. And he actually describes how his vibhuti are manifest in various ways. He says, if you see the light of the sun and the moon, that's me. This is vibhuti. If you taste pure water, Krishna says, that's me. It's my vibhuti. It's my potency. And so he describes that there are empowered Sakyavesha avatars who are incarnations of the Lord, and there are Sakyavesha avatars who his vibhutis, within whom the Lord invests his potency. And one of his potencies is compassion. It's even described in Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada gives the example of one of Krishna's potencies, his qualities, is his compassion. And the example was given how when Bhishma Dev was very eager to have the Lord in his presence, time of his departure, the Lord not only came to be there for his departure out of his compassion, but the Lord began crying out of his compassion for Bhishma Dev. And I think Prabhupada actually explains that this is we should appreciate the Lord's compassionate nature, and therefore we should approach the Lord's compassionate nature. And Prabhupada says, Krishna's compassionate nature is Srimati Radharani. That is Krishna's potency, his compassionate nature, the form of Srimati Radharani, who is understood to be the Lord's compassionate nature. Another manifestation of his compassionate nature. Krishna personally came before Bhishma Dev and with tears in his eyes began crying before Bhishma Dev because of his compassion. So it's one of his potencies, and although the Lord may invest his potency of knowledge in some, as he did with the four Kumaras, he may invest the potency of devotion, as he did in Narada Muni. He may invest his potency of kingly qualities to fight or annihilate miscreants, as he did in Prithu Maharaj and Parasuram. But although his potencies are manifest to a certain degree in each of these empowered avatars, Sakyavesha avatars of the Lord, they don't embody all the potencies of the Lord. Like Baladev Vijabhushan, and I'm going to read some of that today. He gives the example, which Prabhupada oftentimes uses, that when the iron has piece of iron, by association with fire, adopts the quality of fire by association with fire. It's as good as fire. It's not fire. It has its own separate, distinct characteristic as iron. You take it away from fire, it's iron. But if in the association of fire, it's as good as fire. We say the same thing about spiritual mastery. He's as good as Krishna. He's not Krishna, but When Krishna invests his potencies in the spiritual master, just as when you touch iron, you get burnt. When it's fire is an association, potency is invested in the same way. One who associates with an empowered living entity, one experiences the compassion of the Lord through that empowered living entity. Not only does one experience the compassion of the Lord, but one can experience the Lord by the Lord's Krishna Shakti Vininahi Tade Pravartana, by his potency. And as I was about to say before, I wanted to emphasize an important point, because there's a certain tendency to think or to dismiss the achievements of an empowered devotee of the Lord by writing it off. He's a Shakti-Fesh avatar, of course. Which we should always be very, very careful in our understanding of Srila Prabhupada. His achievements, which he was able to accomplish in such a short period of time, no doubt was due to his being empowered by the Lord. But achieving that empowerment was Prabhupada's achievement. And because of his surrender, his full surrender to the instructions of his spiritual master. It's very easy to say, oh, Krishna sent him. Krishna sent him. And all empowerment was already there by Krishna sending him, and therefore everything was meant to take its natural course because Krishna sent him. And he's a resident of the spiritual world, and of course he did wonderful things. But we should be very careful to understand that there is a simultaneous oneness with the Lord, but there's also a difference. And therefore, when we think of the Shakti-Vesh avatar as non-different from the, or as the Supreme Lord, we have to be very careful. And in fact, in this connection, I recently read the Radha Damodar Vilas, which gave a very, very detailed description. But I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to digress too much. But for those of you who may be familiar, I think it was 1972, in New Vrindavan, some devotees, maybe it was 72, could have been 71, forgive me, but that's not so important. Some devotees, 4 sannyasis, disturbed the whole Janmashtami event in New Vrindavan by promoting Srila Prabhupada to be God. And the circumstances which led to that are very detailed. I don't want to go into them because that will certainly be a digression. And I don't want to digress. I don't want to lose the essence of what I wanted to speak about. But when word got back to Srila Prabhupada, to say that he was disturbed is an understatement. He considered it to be a conspiracy to undermine him, to undermine his authority in the movement. And at some point he was actually thinking, maybe I should just go back to India. Why? Because devotees were minimizing by saying Prabhupada's God. And then, because we should always understand there's a simultaneous oneness and difference. Yes, there's a oneness. The Lord's potencies are manifested in a living being who's empowered with his potencies, but he's always a jiva. And he always displays his own natural qualities, his own qualities of utter humility, complete dependence, an individual soul who at every moment makes the choice to surrender himself to the will of the Lord. So what did Prabhupada do? Again, I don't want to go too much, but Prabhupada, he kicked them out of the movement. Kicked them out. But, even though he kicked them out, he still displayed the Lord's compassion. He never gave that up. Never gave it up. He kicked them out. He gave them all sannyas. And why did he give them sannyas? He said, I'm giving you sannyas. Now, you go and preach without anything else. You don't have any of the benefits. You don't have any of the benefits now within the movements. You go out and you serve Lord Chaitanya's mission. I'm giving you sannyas, you have my order. And he made them start their own temples. He made them go. He gave them nothing. Nothing. In fact, when they left New Vrindavan, they were driven to Detroit. And while they were in Detroit, Prabhupada already, devotees knew that Prabhupada was very disturbed by their preaching. And they were therefore kept in a room, and other devotees were said, they were told, we can't associate with these four sannyasis. Because Prabhupada's so angry with them. And then Prabhupada sent an instruction, tell them to go. Tell them to go. And they left the temple. And recently I was listening, one of them was Brahmananda. And as I told, I was recently listening to his memories. And he was describing exactly what happened when Prabhupada kicked them out of Detroit. He said there was four of them. There was Vishnu Jan Swami, there was Subal, there was Brahmananda, and Gargamuni. They had nothing. All they had was a little bag with a few and their dandas. They didn't have any money. Brahmananda had 25 cents. He says he had 25 cents. And they began walking. They didn't know where they were going. They just started walking. And night came, and they had their little packs with their chatters, and they decided to just roll out their chatters, and they slept underneath trees on that night. He described all this in detail, Brahmananda. It's beautiful, so beautiful. And they just slept there. And then Brahmananda tells us a very wonderful story. So when they woke up in the morning, they had no idea where they were. And when he looked across, somehow he saw they were right across from the Ford Motor Company. He took that to be significant. But anyways, but what's more significant, they had no money and they hadn't eaten. They hadn't eaten for, I think, 1 or 2 days. Nothing. Because all they had was 25 cents between them. And then as they were sitting there thinking about, where do we go? What do we do? He said some little boy came over with a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk. Out of nowhere. And then, of course, they broke their fast and they accepted it as, who is this little boy? And then they decided they would go to, I think, Lansing, because there was a college there, and they would go there and preach. They thought, let's go preach. Still, all they had was their dandas. They had finished their loaf of bread, and they finished their bottle of milk, and they hitchhiked to Lansing. And they started doing Harinam. In fact, there's a picture of them, the 4 of them, out in front of a university in Lansing. Vishnu John Swami, Subal, and they're having Harinam Sankirtan. And while they were there, somebody came up to them. Maybe some of you know who that somebody was. Somebody came up to them, and he was very attracted by them, although he knew nothing about Krishna consciousness at the time, but began talking to them, and he and his wife, he invited them to come to his home, and they hadn't eaten for days, and they said, can we get something for you? And they said, yes. They said, we'll cook a whole feast for you. So this household couple he ended up giving his whole paycheck, because the Brahmananda, Gargamuni, and they all went into the supermarket and they bought ingredients because they were hungry. They bought ingredients to cook a feast for their host. Who was their host? Indradumna Swami. Yeah, it was Indradumna Swami. And they stayed there for a few days, and he gave them a place to stay in his flat. And then they decided to go off in different directions and preach. So Prabhupada gave them sannyas, kicked them out. But he was always compassionate to them. And although he kicked them out for saying what, he never gave up his compassion. Because he's empowered with that Shakti to feel compassion for the suffering of others. And then gradually, as they began preaching and making devotees and contacting Prabhupada, he forgave them all. And they came back. And of course, Vishnu Jan Swami, we all know what he was able to accomplish. So, the reason why I went off to speak about that was we should always be very careful to never diminish an empowered living entity who's been empowered with the potency of the Lord, to diminish his accomplishments, his achievements, his surrender, and his humility by simply saying he's a Satya Vaishnava. Naturally, he accomplished wonderful things. We should always know that whenever we speak about an empowered jiva, there is a simultaneous oneness and difference. There's oneness because of the manifestation of the Lord's potency, which is coming through that empowered jiva, but there's a difference also. He's always a jiva. Never the Lord. He's always a jiva. And Prabhupada, in this verse that we read today, he clearly states, Parasya Shakti Vividhai Vishuryate. The Lord has special potency by which he spreads the Krishna consciousness movement. Sorry, I lost track of time. The Lord has special potency by which he spreads the Krishna consciousness movement. This is explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Kali Kalera Dhamma Krishna Nama Sankirtan Krishna Shakti Vininahi Tara Pravartana. One cannot spread the holy name of Krishna without being specifically empowered by Lord Krishna. This requires, as Prabhupada said, Krishna's special power in order to be able to do this. And the Lord also empowers a special devotee to teach people their constitutional position. There's another wonderful purport I wanted to read. It's a short one. And then I'm just going to read, because I spoke about it, and I believe I spoke about it in an understandable way, about what it means to be a vibhuti, somebody who's been empowered with the Lord's potency. Just like also we read in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, we read so many different examples of how the Lord manifests himself throughout the entire creation through his vibhutis, his potencies. And one of those vibhutis is Satya Vaishnavatas. Incarnations, and others which are manifesting to a lesser degree, those who are manifesting the Lord's potencies, of which we have been primarily speaking about his compassion. So this verse is from Antya Lila 352. Haridasa kahi Prabhu chintana kariha yavanera sangsara deki dukkha nabhavyaha. Haridas replied, my dear Lord, do not be in anxiety. Do not be unhappy to see the condition of the yavanas in material existence. Purport. These words of Haridas Thakur are just befitting a devotee who has dedicated his life and soul to the service of the Lord. When the Lord is unhappy because of the condition of the fallen souls, the devotee consoles him, the Lord, saying, "My Lord, do not be in anxiety. This is service." Everyone should adopt the cause of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to try to relieve him from the anxiety he feels. This is actually service to the Lord. One who tries to relieve Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's anxiety for the fallen souls is certainly a most dear and confidential devotee of the Lord. Then he speaks about to blaspheme such a devotee who is trying his best to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the greatest offense. One who does so is simply awaiting punishment for his enemy, for his envy. So compassion. Confidential servant. Very confidential servant, engaged in very confidential service. Yaidam paramam guyam atbhiktesh vajashati. Krishna says, for one who explains his devotional service to others, devotional service is guaranteed. And he comes back to me, Achatasman manusheshu kashtin me priya kritama. There's no more servant dear to me than he, more dear to me than he. So, I took advantage to speak about this on Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. I'll be honest, because sometimes I think about it a lot when I think of Srila Prabhupada. Natural for a disciple to think this way. But I can't imagine finding somebody more compassionate than Srila Prabhupada. It's inconceivable. To see what Prabhupada did. The inconveniences he took. Struggles. Just finished reading, I'll build you a temple. Talk about struggles. His compassion and his love for Krishna. Prabhupada had this laser focus. He considered Bombay the most important city for spreading Krishna consciousness. All his lessons, listen to his lectures in Bombay. Listen to them. He was always thinking of establishing that temple because he wanted to give others the opportunity to come to Krishna consciousness. What he did. It's just inconceivable. Prabhupada would never reject anyone. A few rare occasions he did. But he did for a reason. But he never rejected. Devotees would do so much nonsense sometimes. They would have difficulties in their spiritual life. He was always kind and compassionate. In this way, I consider Prabhupada to be, not only do I, but Shastra does. And I tried to give evidence. He was empowered with the Lord's potencies. I wanted to read just an end with evidence that's given by Baladevich Bhushan when he speaks about Sakyavesh avatars. And I'll read it and explain a little bit. He said, now will be considered the nature of the qualities the Lord manifests in his Avesh incarnations, where he gives special powers to certain individual souls. Then he speaks about those examples which I gave of Narada and Sanat and the Kumars. I'm going to move over it a little bit. And he says that Sanat Kumar and other individual spirit souls are Sakyavesh avatars of the Lord. This means the Lord has empowered them with knowledge or certain other virtues. And then he presents a doubt that someone may have when somebody hears this. And he defeats the doubt. He says, should one meditate on these great devotees as having all the transcendental qualities of the Lord? Or should one not meditate on them in that way? So it's a doubt. Now he's going to address that. Because now we're going to talk about the simultaneous oneness and difference. They're not the Lord. They're always jivas. And then he gives another sutra. Because of his touch, the Lord's touch, it is like this in others also. So he's giving the Lord's potency, his touch, that he gives to empower living entities. And he explains that all the qualities of the Lord are present in the four Kamaras and other Sakyavesh avatars. Why is that? This sutra explains Sambandhat, because of his touch, the Lord's touch. As fire transforms an iron rod, so the touch of the Supreme Lord transforms these great devotees. Now he's going to give another side, a negative view. He said that one should not meditate on all the qualities of the Lord present in Sakyavesh avatars. Why not? The sutra explains avisheshat, because of non-difference. This means that even though the Lord has given them special powers, they remain individual spirit souls. They are not fundamentally different from other individual spirit souls. The word va, or here, hints that because they are very dear to the Lord, these souls should be treated with great respect. And then, gives more evidence. This truth is revealed in the Chandogya Upanishad. There's a verse in the Chandogya Upanishad which states that Narada Muni came before Sanat Kumar because he was seeking knowledge from them. Now, if he was not different from the Lord, why would he have to go before the Sanat Kumars to seek knowledge from them? All knowledge would be already manifested in him. He had the knowledge of devotional service manifest to him, but he came before the Kumaras to seek knowledge from the Kumaras in the Chaitanya. And he gives that as evidence. Then he gives more. Therefore, maintenance and being present everywhere in the sky also. In this sutra, the word sambriti and vyapti are brought together in a collective compound. These two qualities should not be attributed to the Saktyavesh avatars. The reason has been given in the previous sutra. The reason is the Saktyavesh avatars are individual spirit souls, and in a section of the Vedas it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead possesses all powers. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is present everywhere in the great sky. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the first of persons. Who can rival the Supreme Personality of Godhead? In these words, the glories of the Supreme Lord, beginning with his maintenance of all and his being present everywhere in the great sky, are described. These qualities cannot be ascribed to individual spirit souls, for they are qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone. In the descriptions of the four Kumaras and other Saktyavesh avatars, there is no description of their being the creator and controller of all, or of having other qualities that belong to the Supreme Lord alone. For this reason, all the qualities of the Supreme Lord should not be ascribed to them. Giving an example of the difference between the individual souls and the Supreme Lord, the sutra explains, Purusha Vidyayam, it is taught of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the Purusha Shukta prayers. The word cha here hints, and the Gopal Tapani Upanishad and other scriptures also. These qualities of the Lord are mentioned in the descriptions of the Lord in these places, but they are not mentioned in the descriptions of Kumaras and other Saktyavesh avatars. Saktyavesh avatars may be compared to iron rods heated by a fire. As iron rods heated by a fire have two natures, so the Saktyavesh avatars may have two natures also. One nature is like the heat generated by the fire. That nature is the specific qualities with which the Lord has empowered the Saktyavesh avatar. They who meditate on these qualities in the Saktyavesh avatar, they thus meditate on, or in other words, they gain access to. They get access to these potencies of the Lord. They get access to the Lord's compassion. They get access to the qualities which embodies these empowered devotees embody by coming in contact with them. Just by touching an iron rod that's been touched by fire, you immediately get access to fire. You don't have to put your hand in the fire. You get access to fire by touching the iron rod. Who has access to fire? As good as. As good as. This is why we always say, as good as. But never the same. And this was the mistake which these four sannyasis made. And that's why Prabhupada was so angry. He considered it a minimization. To dismiss his authority, to minimize his authority, to minimize he never thought what he accomplished. He didn't think that way. He has the right to not think that way, but we don't have that right. He has the right to think that way. That's why he's so empowered. But we don't have that right. we see clearly what Srila Prabhupada accomplished. And we glorify him unlimitedly for his achievements, for his surrender, for his compassion, for his devotion, for his strict adherence to disciplic succession, to his sacrifices, everything he gave up to serve the order of his spiritual master, which he taught us by his own perfect example. We glorify those qualities of Srila Prabhupada and will never minimize them in any way by our testimony that he was an empowered, indirectly empowered, Satyavesha avatar, empowered with the potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as evidenced by Krishna Shakti Vinanahi Dharmapravartana. It's undisputed what he was able to accomplish. And we glorify him and remember him in that way on such days as his Vyasa Puja. And I've spoken long enough. I'm going to stop.